Hi, I'm Dr. Missy Stec, and today I'm going to talk about how students can design effective presentations through simplifying their message. So when we talk about a simple message, it's the ability to create presentations where the audience can walk away understanding exactly what the presenter was trying to say. And so in most cases, that means eliminating all of the unnecessary words and unnecessary graphics or anything that may be distracting and letting just the necessary information speak. And that's very important when you're working on a presentation for class or in a professional setting. One of the big things to consider when you're looking at presentations is your audience. And what we know based on the research is that you'll lose your audience in 8 seconds. So if you haven't already hooked them in the first 8 seconds of your presentation, then the likelihood is that they have already tuned out to whatever it is that your message is. We also are in a society of people who skim and scan. As they're skimming the materials in your presentation or scanning for keywords, you want to make sure that you're actually presenting the information that they want to hear that isn't necessarily written in your presentation. Because if they have skimmed it or scanned it and they are not interested in the topic or how it's being delivered, they will also tune out. So we're going to talk about 4 big ideas in this particular presentation. We're going to talk about design, transition, words, and data. And we're going to talk about how those 4 things can be important in your presentations and how you can use those 4 elements to simplify your message. The first concept is design. So what I've tried to do in this presentation is to highlight some of the ideas in my presentation that you should try to carry forward into yours. So one of the first key elements is to be consistent. So changing backgrounds or fonts or colors throughout the presentation can be distracting. So trying to stick with one color scheme, one specific font. Try, if you can, to stay with a specific font size, and that consistency as it carries out through your presentation is more visually stimulating to the audience. The other piece about design is you don't want to distract from your message. So a busy background or a busy font change, there's all kinds of things that can be distracting in your presentation, and you want to keep your audience engaged in what you're saying. And people often say that presentations are boring if they're just a black background with white words, but consistent presentations doesn't mean that they're unimaginative. So you can include graphics or pictures. There are all kinds of things that you can include in your presentations that make it exciting, that doesn't have to be written text. So just because you've simplified your presentation doesn't mean you can't be creative. The next big idea is about transitions. And I know when you start to learn about PowerPoint or Keynote, it's very tempting to get excited about transitions. And that means when things fly in, or they dissolve away, or they blow up, or they move in every time you click. And the warning I will give you is that you should try to limit the amount of animation and transitions that you use, because that can be a distracting aspect to your audience. So remember, if you have a slide up and there are 10 bullet points and you have to click every single time you have a new bullet point, that will decrease the attention span of your audience. Your audience wants to see all the information at once. They want to scan it and skim it, and then they want to decide what their next step is in terms of paying attention or being engaged. And what we also know is that by adding too many transitions, that there's really no value added. So you're not adding to your body of information. You're not stressing your point in a different way. Transitions are really just sort of a playful way to move things on and off of a screen that can be distracting to your audience. The next idea is words. And one of the things that we try to stress with students is that you need to learn to be concise. And concise does not mean incomplete. It's taking a huge amount of information and being able to state it articulately in 2 sentences or 2 bullet points. Most slides shouldn't have any more than 3 bullet points. Once you have more than 3 bullet points, you tend to read your slides rather than having a discussion with your audience. And you don't want to read to them. They can read the slides. You already know that they're going to be skimming and scanning them. So making sure that you understand the fine art of being concise. And one of the things students are tempted to do is to put a lot of words in their presentations in very small fonts, which can also be distracting. And so if you put main ideas on your slides using bullet points, then you can articulate what that bullet point means by using all of the words that you didn't put on your slide. So just be careful in terms of the number of words you use. When you're looking at how you use your words, you can always use text that will emphasize your point. So if you notice on this slide, I have very simple white text, and I used a bold font to emphasize my point. And so if there's something that you want to bring attention to, then change the font into a bold. Instead of changing the color or using an animation, just simply change the font size or the font type to help bring attention to that idea. And lastly, you want to always make sure that your audience can read your fonts. And so you want to ensure that you use fonts that are readable and in readable sizes. So we try to tell our students not to use anything below 30 point, and that ensures that they're concise, that they get a certain amount of information on their slide, and that their fonts are readable. The smaller the font, the less likely you're going to engage your audience because they are going to spend an extraordinary amount of time trying to read everything on the slide. So the point of the big idea of words is concise, using text to emphasize, and making sure that your fonts and your font sizes are readable. The last of the big ideas is visuals. So as you use visuals in your presentations, what you're doing is engaging the learner or the audience that isn't engaged by listening to you speak. So you'll get visual learners. And so as you're speaking through a graphic, you're engaging those people who are listening to you and engaging the people who are visual learners. And so it doubles for memory recognition. So people often will recall the contents of a presentation better if there's effective use of visuals. And using visuals, so using graphs and charts and photos and video, stimulates your audience into actually hearing what you're trying to say. So it's better to use a graph or a visual, some sort of photo that's about your message, because that will engage them into listening to you explain why that's applicable to your message. And the biggest sort of take home about visuals is not to say it, but to show it. So I said earlier, it's better not to read your slides. So if you have a visual up and you're articulating your message through explaining the visual, that's a much better way to engage your audience. So these are 3 concepts as you're putting together your presentations that are important, and you can use these concepts going forward as you look at your use of words, your design, your transitions, and your visuals. The point of your presentation is that you should keep it short, it should be organized in a logical manner, and it should be skimmable for the audience so they can skim the presentation and be able to engage quickly. Those are all 3 good concepts as you're putting together presentations. So as an activity, I would like to challenge you to go back and look at this presentation and look at all of the concepts that I talked about and try to see where I have simplified, where I have used words and design to make a point. And then I challenge you to go back to some of the presentations you've put together and look at the concepts that we spoke of as well. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope that this presentation was helpful for you in terms of simplifying your presentations to get your point across. Thanks.